There we go. Showtime. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks.
I'm Brent Holland. Thank you for being here. I appreciate that. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, or a beverage of choice. Get in your most comfy chair, settle in, relax tonight. We're going to have a serious look at the crisis in Ukraine and reveal new information from behind the scenes. First off, before we get started, I'd like to dedicate this show to Canadian medic Private Andrew Miller. Andrew was killed on June 26, 2010 by an IED. He was killed 20 kilometers south of Kandahar. Private Miller was only 21 years old. Our guest tonight is Dr. Sean Maloney. Dr. Sean Maloney is a professor of history at the Royal Military College and served as the historical advisor to the Chief of the Land Staff during the war in Afghanistan. He is an expert on many things, the Cold War, as an example, the war in Afghanistan, and he specializes on nuclear weapons and strategies, and that's where we're going to go tonight. He is author of a multitude of op-eds for Maclean's newspapers. Many will recognize him also from TV, as he remains the go-to guy for media and perspective on crises around the world. Some of the books he has written, these are just a few. How many books have you written?
20, I think.
Oh, dear God. Okay. Emergency War Plan, The American Doomsday Machine, 1945-1960. Learning to Love the Bomb, Canada's Nuclear Weapons During the Cold War, Enduring the Freedom, a rogue historian in Afghanistan. Are you a rogue historian?
I used to be, yeah. I could be again.
We'll talk about that some more. Deconstructing Dr. Strangelove, The Secret History of Nuclear War. Securing Command of the Sea, NATO Naval Planning 1948-1954. It's both an honor and a privilege to have you here tonight, Sean. Thank you for coming on such short notice.
No problem. Anytime.
Sean, I'm going to start off with a question that many in the media avoid, and they're even afraid to entertain, let alone ask. Are we headed to a nuclear holocaust in the Ukraine? Ukraine, I should say.
No, but the possibility always exists that things can go wrong. Yes. So no and yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the yes, and then we'll talk about the no. Why are we headed towards there as a possibility?
Well, the main issue here is when you have a stable deterrent system, it relies on a level of rationality with leadership on all the sides, right? And in this case, the question becomes, if Putin is ill, does he figuratively push the button, take everybody down with him? That is an argument that's in debate right now. There are a number of arguments against that there are too many people around him that don't want to go down with the ship, for example. So you can argue it from both ends, and you can always argue that there's some unforeseen thing that we cannot plan for, that we cannot predict, that might just happen. So like in the Cold War, like any other crisis, the possibility of things escalating to the point where everybody's throwing strategic nuclear weapons at each other, that possibility exists all the time, not just in a crisis like the one we're in.
Are we closer to that precipice at this point?
I don't think so. Not at this point.
Can you explain your perspective on that?
Absolutely. So throughout this crisis, I started tracking this crisis a year ago. This thing has been in play actually since 2014. A lot of people are just waking up to the fact that there's a problem, but it's been a problem for you could arguably take it back to 2007. So this has been ongoing for quite some time. The first Georgia's 2008. That was the test case to try and figure out if the West would react to anything, right? So Putin goes in there, there's no reaction, and he's emboldened to do what he did in Ukraine in 2014. Seizure of Crimea, invasion of the Donbass. So, and what becomes the Luhansk, so-called People's Republic. So this has been going on. And so from 2014 and now, there's been what we refer to as a frozen conflict. There's been over 14,000 people killed from 2014 till now, before we even got to this phase of it. And in my view, the West's media has been criminally negligent in not covering what's been going on, in my view.
Can you give some examples? Because I kind of agree with you.
Well, it's the fact that this is the current iteration of this conflict has taken everybody by surprise. I wasn't surprised by it. Other people I know that study this were not surprised by it. but the ability to mobilize people to understand that there's a problem. We've been crippled by, in fact, we got to go back further. We're crippled by bad history of the Soviet Union and Russia during the Cold War. And so our educational system hasn't kept up. The older people that study this, there's a lot of new data that's come out in the past 10 to 15 years that they're unaware of. So that we're dealing with a lag time in understanding the problem of Russia. And in fact, the media itself is not inclined, in Canada, is not inclined to study this. They don't view it as relevant until now. But I would go further and say that there's enough people, like our opponents, try to keep us confused. And they've got a number of methods to do this. One of them, there's a bunch of names for it. The one I use is hybrid methodology, which I borrow right from General Valery Gerasimov's work. He put his name on it. I'm not sure who actually wrote it, but the idea that you can bamboozle, manipulate, and threaten a country and its people into a state of confusion so that it becomes neutralized from understanding what's going on. And Canada's been on the receiving end of this for quite some time. But with hybrid methodology, we're dealing with media, social media, manipulation of that through active measures, funding the opposition to basically argue with itself. And then of course it's backed up with military threats and potential force. So it's all worked. It works synergistically to neutralize a population. And in Canada, our population is neutralized, right?
Completely.
Everybody's at their throats over what? Fossil fuels, BLM, the trucker convoy, you name it. And so it's not
distractions.
Right. It's not like this is done through puppet mastery type conspiracy stuff. It's a question of if there's a venue, augment it and generate as much chaos and disorder as possible. And we've been on the receiving end of that sort of thing for quite some time.
You talk about, please go ahead.
So, of course, one of the reasons the Russians want Canada disrupted is as the largest diaspora of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine.
Yes.
And it's a potential support base for anti-Soviet and then anti-Russian activity. And so they've already done this before, back in the 1980s. The Soviet Union ran active measures against Canada and thoroughly disrupted the relationship between the Ukrainian Canadian community and the Jewish Canadian community and set them at each other. And we have the documentation on this. This isn't just theory. We have it. We know what they were doing. And that completely disrupted the ability of the Jewish and the Ukrainian Canadian communities to work together to undermine the Soviet Union. So in that sense, it was a success for the Soviet Union. We are now living with the echo of that today. So you see Canadian media outlets screaming about the neo-Nazi Azov battalion and Canada's training Nazis and blah, 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 blah. And ad infinitum, without any context. Your average Canadian has no clue what the Azov battalion is until the Mariupol siege, right? And
Can you tell us?
All of a sudden, CTV has 2 or 3 articles on this. The Ottawa Citizen has multiple articles on this, and then somebody's attacking Krista Freeland for being a Nazi. Okay, that's what you see this without any context. And Canadians without the historical background see a crooked cross, and they're like, "Oh my God, terrible!" Of course, it is terrible.
Neo-Nazis. Yeah, it's not true. Can you explain what the difference is between neo-Nazis and what Christian Freeland is? And Christian Freeland, folks, is the Deputy Prime Minister in Canada for the American listeners.
One of the biggest problems we have, and we're talking about history not being taught properly. Eastern European history is very different from Western European history in terms of how it unfolded over the centuries. Mm-hmm. And then we could go into this for hours. There's a number of people that have done some exceptional work on this already. But summed up, you had people in Ukraine, Poland, and elsewhere that were caught between 2 different totalitarians, the Soviet totalitarians and the Nazi totalitarians. And some of them picked the wrong side or picked the right side, depending how you look at it. And there are a large number of people that did so out of survival. Doesn't excuse anything bad that happened. There was plenty of it. But there's absolutely no sympathy at all for anybody who was caught up in that dynamic. Because if you're looking at the world through a black and white lens, everybody there is, anybody that worked with the Germans at that point is beyond the pale because of the Holocaust. Right? So you can make that argument. But on the other hand, you're looking at the Soviets. They're just as bad as the Nazis. And that's the history that has not been taught in Canada. Yeah. Holodomor, which they conduct a genocide against the Ukrainians. Yeah. So it's not surprising that some Ukrainians would side with the Germans rather than the Russians. But that's not taught. It's too complex. It's emotional for a hell of a lot of people.
Doesn't fit into a 15-second soundbite either.
It doesn't at all. I mean, I can't do it if I'm on CTV. This doesn't work, let alone
exactly.
Yeah. And so it's easier just to label, and so the other side likes to do this to make linkages and to discredit. So Canada's training Nazis, so that justifies what they're doing in Ukraine, that sort of thing. It's absurd because it's not that simple, and it does not justify anything that Russia's done against Ukraine at all. But it's manufactured into that, right?
Is this just a continuation of the Cold War that started it may have even started before the Second World War? Or do you feel there was a true break with perestroika?
This is a complete break. This is what we're looking at.
Really?
What we're looking at with the Russians right now under the Putin regime is a complete, it's its own entity. It's its own thing. It is part of the trajectory of Russian history. But people keep saying, oh, he's trying to reconstruct the Soviet Union. No, he's not. He's actually trying to reconstruct Imperial Russia in the 1800s.
Oh.
Yeah. So the co-option of the Russian Orthodox Church, the creation of a Eurasian identity, it's all there if you look for it. If you know what to look for, it's right there. But our media does not go there. They don't have the depth or the interest to try and understand the phenomenon.
You just mentioned the Russian Orthodox Church. Can you explain your perspective on that?
Yes. No, I come at it through the work on nuclear weapons. There's some fantastic literature that's looked at the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in helping rebuild the nuclear custodial organization called the 12th Main Directorate. These are the guys that handle and protect nuclear weapons and are part of the command apparatus. So they have to be handled very carefully. In the Soviet Union, they were hardcore, dedicated communists. With communism ceasing to exist, what motivates these guys? And then a profit environment with a collapsed Soviet Union, how do you stop them from selling weapons and special nuclear material and so on, right? So in part, to rebuild that organization, Russian Orthodox Church became involved. And so this is now a religious imperative. Nuclear weapons are blessed by priests. I've seen pictures of them walking around missile launchers 3 times and blessing them. This isn't a joke. This is very serious stuff. The launch control facilities all have icons in them, and those are all consecrated. And in fact, it's built into their nuclear doctrine that the use of nuclear weapons is morally acceptable within the imprimatur of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, the guys who wrote about this, I tried to review their stuff from the Canadian Military Journal, and the editor just rejected it out of hand, said it was too crazy. I said, well, okay, it's crazy to you, but that's how this operates. Now, the scary part about this vis-a-vis nukes is, in their view, they're fighting Satan. And they literally, what they're fighting is, in their words, a neo-Nazi, Zionist, LGBTQ conspiracy to destroy Russia. That's the ideology. I've seen it in Russian. I've watched it in Russian. But I tried to explain that to people here about 5 years ago, and people here in Canada just can't process that kind of thinking. I mean, it's easier to focus on QAnon and the American crazies and mock them, but in this case, this is something they don't even want to touch. It's too far out for them. But it is, in fact, the basis of what the problem is here. So the problem with this on the nuke side is that it means that there is a moral path to use nuclear weapons in the defense of Russia against Satan, literally. Okay? And I've watched funerals of dead Russian troops going back where the local pastor of the ROC in wherever is explaining to the people that their son died trying to defeat Satan in Ukraine. Mm. I don't see any of that in Canadian media. So we're dealing with something that's actually quite frightening because it now has the moral sanction of God to use nuclear weapons to defend Russia. Now, how different is that from having to deal with the Taliban and Al Qaeda? When I raised that question, nobody wants to go there.
Nobody wants to go there. Is the zealotry as profound as it was with the Taliban and Al Qaeda?
No, I wouldn't say. It's not quite the same. These guys aren't going to commit suicide necessarily. That's the break on all this. Even though it's a state religion, it is still of a Christian bent, and so there are constraints there. But if the leadership of Russia wants to have a moral justification for doing what they're doing. They've got it. Whereas our justification, say in the West or in the States, comes from the democratic process. Okay, the separation of church and state exists within the nuclear forces of the U.S. Air Force. I've checked. I got a friend of mine that used to be in charge of all that, and they've taken great pains to make sure that evangelicals don't wind up in charge of nuclear weapons. So, in a number of cases, so it's not when we're dealing with this morally equivalent universe the Canadian media and academia like to play in. It's not like that. It's not.
Sean, yesterday when we spoke, we talked about the use of tactical nuclear weapons as a means of conversation, if you will, as a means of communication to the other side. Can we go there, or would you prefer
absolutely.
not? Okay,
so,
great.
Your listening audience needs to understand we've got strategic nuclear weapons, then we have battlefield nuclear weapons, and then there's sort of what we call intermediate nuclear forces. And the reason we had different types, they had different ranges, different yields, and they played different roles in the doctrine on the battlefield. Okay, so our opponents have kept sort of a bit of everything, and in the West we've really drawn down, except on the strategic nuclear side. So there are battlefield nukes on our side, but the intermediate nuclear forces aren't quite there. The other side's broken the INF treaty, so they actually have those systems. And the problem we've got in Ukraine, since Ukraine is not part of NATO and it doesn't have its own nuclear forces, it theoretically can't deter the use of anything the Russians want to apply. Is it biological, chemical, battlefield nukes, intermediate, whatever, okay? There's technically no constraint on them from doing so. Guess does the deterrent umbrella extend over Ukraine? This is the question. That's the question we've been looking at since January. Actually, no, back up, December 2021.
No fly zones and all those things.
Yeah. So at this point, because the casualties and the stalled ground offensive and the abject failure of the Russian army and its leaders to gain significant traction in Ukraine, there's been a number of ideas, and the other side has helped with this with their information operations. Basically, either surrender or these weapons will be employed, or they may use them out of frustration. These are sort of the two schools of thought that have been out there. So on the plus side, there have been deterrent moves in the West to counteract that. So the most important one was when Biden came out and said that the West would reply in kind. Now, I know there's a lot of people that don't like Joe Biden for various political reasons. That was the right thing to say at the right time, because it looked to me at the time, and I watched the nukes being moved around. The capability certainly exists to have done that. He could have done it out of frustration. He could have done it to signal, say nuke Kharkiv and then demand the rest of the country give up. There's a whole bunch of scenarios in there, right?
Yep.
And so when Biden said that was important. What he was responding to mostly was the threats to use chemical weapons. The West doesn't really have chemical capability like the Russians still do at all. So, and nobody's going to use biologicals. That sort of doesn't fit. Those are slow acting. You can't control them, that kind of thing. So in this case, what we're dealing with is we would essentially, if the other side used chem, the only response on the WMD side is to use small nukes. And that's a credible threat from the West, given some of the pieces that have been moved around in the oceans and in the air. So that's definitely part of what's been going on. Absolutely.
Is there a scenario? I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, is there a scenario where we would ever launch first, even small tactical nuclear weapons, to prevent an aggression across a border, say to Latvia?
That's been interesting. That's been a problem going back to the 1950s. Is that there's preemption and then there's preventive war, or two concepts. And my study of U.S. nuclear war plans,
great book,
is there are always preemption options on the list.
So you can't rule that off the table.
Nope.
Not at all.
They want to keep it nice and ambiguous. That's part of the deterrent apparatus, right? Like we don't
absolutely.
We in the West don't want to telegraph what we're going to do. I mean,
no, of course not.
Are watching Twitter, all the people commenting on what the Ukrainians should be doing in the war, and then watch them like do it like a football game on CNN. I mean, why tell the other side what you're going to do? It's ridiculous. So in this case, yeah, I mean, there's going to be, the other side is never going to know for sure. My take on it, from looking at the history of it, is there's always been leadership targeting as part of the plans. So the other side's leader is whoever initiates this is not going to escape. They're going to be dead.
That must be part of their strategy as well, right?
Yep.
Given MAD, mutual assistance.
Well, this actually
mutual
goes
assured
back to
destruction.
the Cuban Missile Crisis, and before that with General Tom Power, who led Strategic Air Command. And he's had an information campaign. He had met Khrushchev in the 50s, and his approach to deterrence was, you can see it in his speeches. He's basically threatening Khrushchev, if you pull anything, we can get you. We're coming for you. That's the subtext of what he says in the speeches. And then when you look at the Airborne Alert Force, which goes into the Arctic during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's deliberately routed over Soviet signal intelligence. They can monitor it. And when the DEFCON changes, the number of planes goes up. And Khrushchev, that was reported to Khrushchev. That was one of the key factors in constraining Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But again, most people don't know this. So, but the idea that the enemy leadership is not going to get away with this unscathed at the start of anything is integral to the deterrence strategy.
You mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis. It'll be 60 years this year, folks, 1962, October. And Sorensen told me that the difference between Khrushchev and Castro was the fact that Castro wanted to bring the palace down around him, whereas Khrushchev knew he had a culture, a people, a country that had to survive, and nuclear holocaust would just eradicate all that. Do you think Putin falls in that same type of category as Khrushchev?
Well, I'd say let's look at the psychology of the type of people that wind up running countries like this. It's real similar, right? Mm-hmm. They're able to operate and survive and flourish in a totalitarian environment. So they got skills. And do you want to throw all that away? If you've got an ego, you have a legacy. You want your legacy blown away? Vice tearing it all down like Samson. Yeah. So we can't psychoanalyze the guy. He's not in front of us. We don't know him. I've met people that have met him, and people have written about him who have met him. And he's a KGB guy.
Yes.
Those guys are playing games every time. You could be having dinner and it would be a game to him. Okay. Mm-hmm. All about power, personal power over other people. And this is the ultimate. He's got the ultimate power and he knows it. So my gut tells me he's not going to just relinquish that. But if he's on the way out and he's dying, who knows? So that's a big question mark right now. I wouldn't underestimate that right now. That's why I said yes at the beginning and as well as no.
You've mentioned that a couple of times. Do you think he may be ill? Maybe somebody around him, perhaps, speculation, may have poisoned him the way he's poisoned so many other people?
Who knows? That's good. Really
okay. It'd be interesting to see.
I mean, when I want to laugh, I just look at Death of Stalin.
That's a funny movie, folks. If you've never seen it, I would recommend it highly.
I'd recommend it absolutely.
Absolutely for a good laugh. It's a very, very fun movie. China, we can't ignore China.
Oh man,
what's your perspective in all this? Has China made a mistake signing what I consider a non-aggression pact with Russia?
Yeah,
have they been duped?
Pacts can be made and broken. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it. What is best for Z and the current leadership of that country will be what matters, not what they've signed or done or not done, right?
Okay.
Take on it. And they'll loudly protest anything to the contrary, and that's fine. But that country will operate, that regime will operate in its best interests, no matter what they are.
What's the reason they haven't launched a tactical nuclear weapon or even used chemical weapons or biological weapons? I'm talking about Russia against Ukraine.
Well, I think they're being deterred. Now, why? I've been keeping track of a number of things, and we collectively call it signaling. And the Americans and the French and the British have done substantial signaling with their strategic nuclear forces. Fundamentally, people are familiar with ballistic missile launching submarines. If you watch the movie Crimson Tide, you get an idea, right? So the issue here is when those submarines deploy, they go and hide in the middle of the ocean somewhere, and you never know where they are. Okay, and you don't tell anybody where they are. That's how they protect themselves. So during this crisis, the British sortie one of their Vanguard class submarines in broad daylight on New Year's Day, and make sure everybody's taking pictures of it before it dives. That's highly unusual. Like, that doesn't happen. Okay, like it's very rare. And then to have that made that public on New Year's Day when no government worker does any work at all is kind of interesting. So that's one of them. The Americans, at one particular part in the crisis, they've got at least, at a minimum, 4 of their ballistic missile subs at sea in the Pacific. And there's other ones in the Atlantic, and so there was a lot of threats moving back and forth. There were nuclear capable bombers up north of Canada operating at one point. And out of nowhere on Twitter, the chief of naval operations tweets that the USS Nevada, the submarine, is visiting Guam for a port call, which the CNO is identifying the location of a major nuclear asset. Like that, I told that to a friend of mine in the States who's familiar with these, sort of been read in and all this stuff. He just went nuts. Like, what? I said, is that signaling? He starts laughing. Of course it is. And so just to put the punctuation point on that, an E-6 Mercury, which is a command and control aircraft for nuclear weapons, it shows up in Guam and circles around and people take pictures of it, and that goes on Twitter. So, okay. Now, why is this important? That particular type of submarine has 24 ballistic missiles. Each ballistic missile can carry up to 10 nuclear weapons, or what we call reentry vehicles. So that's 240 potential targets from one submarine. And if you look at Google Earth and you draw a line from Guam across Russia, it lines up with practically all the Russian ballistic missile sites that are currently active. So
that's a deterrent.
That's one submarine, and they let them know that. There was another one they did. There's a cruise missile launching submarine. It's like a cruise missile Pez dispenser. It fires like 140 or 160 Tomahawk, right? It surfaces and visits Cyprus for a port visit, and then that's tweeted all over the place. Well, if you range gate that out from that submarine, you hit everything in West Russia with that submarine. And that's one sub. So, the number of these things start happening. And then there's a lot of noise made about Poland by the Russians. They start threatening Poland. And then the French, who don't talk about nuclear matters at all, ever.
And as you pointed out yesterday, everybody forgets that France is a nuclear power.
And it doesn't coordinate with the Americans, and it doesn't coordinate with the British, and it doesn't coordinate with NATO. It's the wild card deterrent. And they've got 4 ballistic missile subs. And all of a sudden, the French media is like, wow, 3 of the 4 missile submarines are at sea. That hasn't happened since the Cold War. And then the next day, they do a live a test of a air-to-surface missile that has a nuclear capability, which is usually used as the shot across the bow before they fire things off. So you've seen signaling, and there's more. I could go on to. I got a lecture that goes for like 2 hours on this, but those are the 3 key ones. And so the other side's been told they can see it, and they have to take that into consideration because it's serious. Especially the French. The French can they're not necessarily constrained the way the British or the Americans are, and that's deliberate.
What gave Putin the idea that he could get away with this and actually cross that border and go into Ukraine?
Oh man, we get to go right back to when they moved an aircraft carrier in the Gullfaks oil field off of Norway, and nobody did anything, and they shut the oil field down for days. Back in I think it was 2007.
Wow.
If you go back and look, there's a whole bunch of times he's tested the West, right? And in various ways. And their assessment of us must be that we were incredibly weak, or else they wouldn't have tried to pull this off.
That reminds me, of course, is Hitler.
Oh,
he tested the West and and didn't believe that we would draw the line and actually do something when he went into Poland. I mean, to me, Czechoslovakia is Ukraine, and Sudetenland is Crimea.
I mean, it's scary.
Unbelievable.
And I'm watching the Germans stay out of this.
Yeah.
In effect, right?
Yeah.
They try to play a mediating role with the Russians, which is like trying to mediate with the Terminator. And, it's just the other side really thought that especially after the American elections and after all the other stuff that's going on, they really thought they had us disrupted. And they still have Canada disrupted because Canada's response to this is not what it should be. But
what should it be? Can you go there?
There should have been. We should be ramping up the support on all levels. Wheat, the wheat problem we're going to be dealing with around the world. We need to be part of the solution to that. Oil, obviously, the government makes war on Alberta and wants to put us in this green utopia. That's not going to work in this present circumstances.
Agreed.
On the military side, we were working with Ukrainians for several years. I had many friends of mine and ex-students that served there. But in this case, the problem isn't just Ukraine, it's the Baltic states and the rest of NATO. We're already committed to assisting to deter attacks against places like Latvia.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's where Canadian leads a battle. Force.
I mean, the army's hollowed out. It really needs to be rebuilt and refurbished. And if the government keeps the army running around filling sandbags in the Red River, it can't train to go and do the job properly.
Exactly right.
Some people are arguing that this is deliberate so that we don't deploy anywhere. But
it's because the Canadian Army is peacekeepers.
Oh, that's a whole separate lecture.
Yeah, it makes me crazy too.
Oh, okay.
Is there a possible scenario that you could foresee that would warrant troops going into Ukraine? I'm talking about NATO troops into Ukraine.
In my view, they should be there now. But
please tell me that perspective.
The next best thing is what's happening now. I think that it is their country. They do have they've been preparing. Understand, one of the reasons that it's in the state that it's in right now is because they've been preparing for this for 7 years, 8 years. Okay, they absorbed the hit and then they responded to it. Like those cities were pre-stockpiled to feed themselves for months. And that's if you look at anybody doing the strategy for the country knows that. That's why the cities held out so long, right? But they were preparing for it for a long time. The other thing too is that because of the long-term frozen conflict, you have a hell of a lot of Ukrainians that have military training. So you're not just throwing civilians into the line. Almost like when I was there, our waiter at a coffee shop, it was a sniper, and he was about to do his summer rotation down in Donbass, and he was 22. He'd been there already, and there's all sorts of people. Like it's not the country has been fighting a war since 2014, right? So you've got a lot of people that basically you're in the nations and arms stuff. So yeah, it's as long as they keep getting the weapons they need to do the job, I think they'll be fine.
Is there a winning scenario that you can foresee, or is that just basic survival and perhaps some kind of autonomy for Ukraine?
Well, I think what's going to happen, basically, what has to happen is that they have to push the Russians out of what's territorial Ukraine, all the way. They have a term in Ukrainian for it, which translates to kick them to the curb. The curb being the border with Russia, and there's no way. Having seen that population's undergone the atrocities in Bucha and elsewhere, it's just not in the mood for conciliation. And so to have people in Canada sit here and say, stop the killing so people can live, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, would you rather be a slave under the Russians or dead? And the Ukrainians have decided that, no, we're going to fight back. I mean, there's a lot of Canadians that really think they know better, about what should be done there. And
that's why they need to take your classes at R.M.C. And read your books, and I'll mention them after too. Somewhere else I wanted to go before we run out of time is the propaganda that's coming out on social media, RT TV, all these other various outlets that the Russians use to their expertise. You had mentioned how in the 80s, they had brought the Ukrainian population and Jewish population together by undermining against each other, by undermining each other here in Canada. We know that there was involvement also in the election, the American election, using propaganda and things of that nature. What's going on now? Wow,
that's the thing is, this thing is like a boulder. Once it has a momentum, it's just going to, an inertia, it's just going to keep going, right? Till it deflects one way or another. That thing has been put in motion 4, 5, 6 years ago. So now we're having sort of after effect, right? So just let's use the anti-vaxxing stuff. There are people that don't want to be vaxxed, and they've got reasons for that, and fair enough. There are people that take that and then add that to other things that they don't like, and maybe wrap it in something else as well. And if you can get a synergy going, now on the left they call it intersectionality. This is sort of like right intersectionality. If you can get a number of people on different topics working together towards or moving in the same direction, it develops a momentum. So, for example, there's been a study done. If people who are anti-vaxxers are more likely to be, say, pro-trucker convoy, and more likely to be anti-Ukraine. Okay, now how is that possible? Mm-hmm. That shows that there's a lot of intersectionality between the people who are involved in that. Now, again, example. I know it's confusing, but what it boils down to is the other side doesn't control this. The other side stokes it. Okay, they'll support it, but then so they'll RT Free is a perfect example. During the trucker convoy, RT had like 7 articles in a 48-hour period on the trucker convoy in RT, in the English language RT, and then it was echoed in Russian language media back in Russia. And then they interviewed my MPP, Randy Hillier, who's going on. RT is a better, freer media outlet than the CBC is. So with the other side doesn't really have to do a lot. It can stimulate something. Momentum develops, then they film it, then they use it for their purposes. So you've got Russian media showing what's going on in Canada, and they're basically saying this is the country that supports Ukraine, and if the people are against the government that supports Ukraine, then the people in Canada don't really support Ukraine. This is how it works, right?
It's the whole idea behind it is chaos and division.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever seen the United States more polarized than I go back to the 60s, the anti-Vietnam revolution.
And yet, if you talk to people, I know a hell of a lot. I mean, I did my PhD down there. You talk to people, there are people that firmly believe the election was stolen. And it doesn't matter what the facts are, they believe that.
Yeah.
How do you work with that? And if that becomes the jumping off point for continuing division, I don't know what the solution set is. All I know is that Putin and our friends in Beijing are laughing up their sleeve at this, and they're going to exploit it for all it's worth.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like the America First movement before the Second World War.
That's right. Isolationism.
Yeah. I mean,
it's very dangerous.
Oh, totally.
Even more so today than then. Folks, if you're just joining us, our guest tonight is Sean Maloney, and he is a professor of history over at R.M.C. here in Kingston, Canada. Sean, can you just tell us very quickly what R.M.C. is for our American viewers?
Oh, Royal Military College would be a tri-service equivalent of one of the service academies. Okay. So like West Point or Annapolis or the Air Force Academy.
And you teach military history there?
Yeah, I do. I
with multiple books, and I'm going to read a few of them right now, just so people can be aware. Emergency War Plan, The American Doomsday Machine, 1945-1960, Learning to Love the Bomb, Canada's Nuclear Weapons. Yeah, during the Cold War. That's going to be an eye-opener for Canadians and everybody around the world. Nice, peaceful Canada. Only time we go Meshuggah is when we get hockey sticks on our hands. Enduring the Freedom, a rogue historian in Afghanistan, deconstructing Dr. Strangelove, the secret history of nuclear war. There's more to that title. What's the rest of the title?
Oh, deconstructing Dr. Strangelove. It's the secret history of nuclear war movies.
War movies, okay. That's a great film. I love that film.
Oh, my favorite.
Yahoo! Securing Command of the Sea, NATO Naval Planning, 1948-1954. So this fellow knows his stuff, doesn't he? Let's continue along the lines with propaganda and what the Soviets make use of, China. I'm assuming we must do propaganda too. Have you seen any evidence of that emerging in Russia at all?
Oh, it's tough to tell. I would suggest that our existence is propaganda. Okay, and I'm not kidding. I'm not.
I get it.
Our existence is propaganda. We're the enemy. and whatever period you want to look at. But the fact that we exist, our imperfect democracy, our imperfect way of life, is a hell of a lot different and in many ways superior to what your average Russian is confronted with on a day-to-day basis. And there are a lot of people, this particularly with Ukraine. And I've noticed this again. I watched the wall come down when I was serving in Germany at the end of the Cold War. And when you talk to people, like one of the biggest things in the Cold War is West Berlin. West Berlin showed the East Germans and anybody else that could see into it what the alternative was. So, I mean, one of the problems we've got in Canada is all this moral equivalency stuff that's still embedded in our psyche and in Canadian history, where everybody's all just morally equal, and it's not true.
No, it's not at all.
We are a far freer society than either communist China now or the present Russian Federation is, despite the problems that we've got. And we've got them, but somebody wants to tell me I should go and live in Novosibirsk rather than here.
Yeah, I know what my choice would be too. There's no question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why did Putin choose this time to go into the Ukraine? Was that planned, do you think, years ago, or do you think maybe things?
I think they've been on a trajectory for quite some time, in my view. There were a number of us who were trying to figure this out in the fall when we saw the buildup, right? Like, why now?
Yeah.
And at the time, a number of us batted around the idea that COVID is going to generate so much demographical damage in Russia because they've mishandled it, that they have better launch it now before they lose the mobilization base. That was one idea. Another, the speculation that Putin was ill had started a long time ago back then as well. So he needs to get this over with, get part of his legacy before he goes. So those ideas have been bandied about. But it's pretty clear to me they've been on this trajectory since at least 2007, when they actually start the information ops laydown back then. You start seeing novels pop up, future history novels, alternative history novels about a war for Ukraine back in 2007 in the Russian, like in the Russian equivalent of Indigo or Chapters or Borders, right? So there were already people along those lines. Then there's a guy named Alexander Dugin, who's very scary. He's a proponent of Eurasianism, and he's essentially, he's a Russian fascist. And there's a number of these writers that have had an influence on the course of events, starting right at the end of the Cold War. The idea of a Eurasian landmass dominated by Russia, which goes all the way to like the English Channel. I mean, you read this stuff, it's almost like they pirated Nazi-era geopolitics.
Yes.
Okay? It's almost lifted from it. Of course, it's all in Russian. Nobody here is reading it, except for a handful of specialists. And this has developed really over 30 years. This is the sort of next phase of this. And so there must be something there where they figure that they ran out of time.
It sounds like Putin wants breathing room, which leads me, that's a good segue into the next question. I want to ask you about Canada's north. Many people forget that the shortest way to get to the United States and Canada with ICBMs is right across the pole.
Yep, absolutely.
Can you speak to that? Can you speak to the inroads and the outroads that Russia's trying to make on taking Canada's territory away from it?
I'm trying to remember what year it was. They put 2 mini subs at the North Pole and planted underwater. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was around 2008. I'd have to go check.
Talk about chutzpah, Dick. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've been doing all sorts of stuff up there going back into the 20s and 30s. This isn't, again, it's not new, but with global warming and the opening up of terrain,
the ice flows. Yeah.
All of a sudden, things become accessible. The largest gold mine in the world, I believe, is up somewhere there, right? Largest diamond mine.
Right. Yeah.
And what country funds that? I think China in one case. So there's things that are going on up there that remain unknown to the Canadian population, except the people that live up there. And it's not really talked about down here, right?
There's no population up there, so we tend to ignore it for the most part. The odd time we'll see a little operation going on. You'll see a bunch of rangers and forces going out on skidoos, but beyond that, there's not much.
What really got my attention was about a year ago. So March 2021, the Russians ran an exercise called UMCA 21. And I'm watching high definition, beautifully produced footage on Russian Ministry of Defense websites showing the surfacing of 3 Russian ballistic missile submarines to the ice. And I'm looking at this going, that's not that far from the North Pole.
Yeah.
Now, why is this a problem? Because to go and kill those, you need nuclear submarines to go under the ice and kill them. We don't have those because the Mulroney government chose not to get them because they were afraid of a handful of very vocal anti-nuclear activists. And then they made an excuse that we don't need them because the Cold War's over. You just don't grow a capability like that overnight. It's not possible.
Yeah.
I mean, so if we had those now, we'd be in a position to track, hunt those subs down, offset them, deter them, right? Somebody else has to do that. Somebody else is paying to do that, and it's not us. And it's technically, and some of this is going on in our waters anyway. So the Americans and Brits do it essentially on our behalf, but we don't pay them to do that. And yet we squawk every time that we need to add something new to help to provide surveillance to the continent, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's really disingenuous. I mean,
this
is not the way we played it in the 50s and 60s when we were committed to being part of surveillance and defending the continent.
I'm not mistaken, just after the Second World War, we had the third largest Navy in the world. What happened to that capability?
Oh, that drew down at the end of the Second World War. But our ability to have presence and surveillance and project power in the North was substantial. Even by 1940 standards, we could put a brigade into the Arctic at the others. See, the biggest problem at that point was the Soviet bombers couldn't get all the way over here. But they've got 8 airborne divisions. And if they can drop those on airfields in the North, then they can bring the bombers over, refuel them, and then nuke the United States. And that they actually planned that. And this is another next book I'm working on. So they had plans to do that kind of thing. So the ability to track down and destroy ice runways becomes important. In fact, we find a crashed Soviet bomber on an ice runway just outside of Canadian territorial waters back in 1958.
To say nothing of Alaska being right there as well.
Yeah. Again, the cold part of the Cold War is very real. I mean, it makes its way into popular culture, like Ice Station Zebra and things like that.
Yes.
But that's all forgotten. The next generation that we're dealing with here doesn't have any knowledge of any of this. So, like, there's all sorts of stuff that went on. And by the way, back in February, March, the Russians are operating nuclear-capable aircraft just outside our airspace.
I remember that. Weren't they challenged? Didn't they try to fly over Canadian airspace?
NORAD had held an exercise, a sudden anti-cruise missile exercise on 21st of February. And
More signaling.
He tweeted that, and then there was nothing else. Nobody followed up on that, right? Nobody asked questions. So from what I can tell, they launched, the other side had 4 backfire Tu-22M bombers, followed by 2 or 4 Blackjack Tu-160 bombers. The Blackjack, it's a cruise missile Pez dispenser. It carries about 12 to 16 cruise missiles, depending on the loadout. The nuclear capabilities between 100 and 300 kilotons, I think. So,
would there be any way, if NATO does go to war with Russia, to keep it conventional and stay away from chemicals, biologicals, WMDs, and nukes?
I don't know. The scenario would have to be much more
mapped out,
specific.
Okay.
Before I could answer that. But
do you feel that if Putin, how does this end in your mind? I was going to talk about Putin being taken out.
Putin has to die fundamentally, and then we have to see what comes after Putin and whether they want to negotiate or not. But it doesn't end neatly. Maybe it chugs on like this. Maybe he's dying for years. Who knows?
Quote unquote.
Or it's a fortuitous event where somebody takes him out.
Well, I was going to ask, can the West help him along with his demise, so to speak?
Probably not. It'll have to come to a natural conclusion over there. In my
by somebody.
I have no way of predicting any of that.
Of course. Okay. Yeah.
But the scenario will exist where if that happens and Russia does fragment, you could wind up with half a dozen nuclear armed states.
That is a concern, Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going to go next, actually. What happens if there's a revolution that takes place inside Russia and that becomes fragmented?
That's right.
Is that more dangerous than where we're at right now?
Oh, yeah, because their nuclear command and control apparatus is not the replica of ours in terms of checks and balances.
Can you talk about that?
In a general sense, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
People are more familiar with the American aspects of this because of pop culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, people freaked out with Trump and the so-called button, and I had to calm people down. I mean, CNN was terrifying people over that. Mm-hmm. The American system has a lot of checks and balances in it, built into it. So there's no button to push on the American side. There's a very elaborate process. The Russian side, not so much.
Disconcerting.
Yeah. So basically, there are three people involved in the process. And one of them has now been fired. The other one looks like he's death warmed over, and the other one may have cancer. So what's the succession planning? Who knows? And of course, they keep that blurred so that we can't exploit that, right?
Exactly.
So, and then the question becomes, they're very moralistic and at the same time legalistic. And if they have the legal criteria within their minds that they can do it, and they get the moral sanction of the Russian Orthodox Church, then they can do it.
Finland, Sweden. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
But yeah, so the situation there is, in my view, very dangerous.
I agree.
There's no parallel to this during the Cold War. This is, in my view, probably the most dangerous thing we've been involved with in 30 to 40 years.
Agreed. Yeah, I was terrified a few weeks ago. Now it looks like I agree with you that perhaps we've gone past that possibility of a nuclear exchange somehow, even if it was just tactical and held to Ukraine. Perhaps we've moved past that, but the scenario is always there. Presents itself.
I would never rule any of this out. The problem is, in this country, nobody wants to spend the money to prepare for this sort of thing.
I know.
They just give up. It's very strange. Our ancestors would be wondering why we're so craven about everything in this country, in my view.
Yeah, I agree. The whole idea of Canada was to prevent the Americans coming in. That's why we built the train across the country, and so we could move troops very quickly.
Yeah, it's actually very disconcerting. But this isn't the 50s. I mean, the 50s, you had multi-megaton yield weapons that you could blow a 2 mile wide crater in the ground, right? Those weapons don't exist anymore like that. Not like that. No,
these are species-ending events that would take place. So. Finland, Sweden, they've just they're lining up to be part of NATO. Is that good, bad, indifferent?
It's fantastic. That puts more pressure on the Putin regime. That means, in their mind, I mean, we don't have to do anything as long as they join. There's that border. And the Russian military analysis won't view what's on the other side of the border. It'll just look at the fact that there's a border there that they got to put forces on. Yeah. That's going to draw resources onto that. They're going to have to keep a very close eye on Finland and Sweden, and that's going to draw more analytical capability away from other things. It's going to force them to overextend in certain areas. Absolutely. In fact, that's already happening. We can see it.
Is there a chance he's going to follow up, do you think, on his threats and go in to Finland before they join? Who knows?
That would be interesting. The Finns will fight like the Ukrainians have.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of talk right now, and then we'll see.
Speculation.
You have to look at talk versus capability. What can they do, right? And if they can't defeat Ukraine, what makes them think that these people are going to be able to defeat Finland?
Well, then they're on two fronts too. They're fighting a war on two fronts.
I mean, so yeah, you've got a lot of people talk. I mean, there's a lot of talk out there, but look at the resources.
Yeah, just a lot of noise. By the way, folks, that the border between Finland and Russia is 1,340 kilometers. See, I did some research. 4:00 this morning, my friend. 830 miles long, as I translate it to American. Operation Reassurance, Canada's battle group in Latvia. Are our forces prepared? Are they equipped? Better question, maybe.
I don't think so. I think it's much stronger than what we got. And then we have to have the ability to reinforce it. So I would take it further to have a fully equipped battle group there, fit within the larger context of a brigade. That's a good start. I was never in favor of this sort of piecemeal stuff that we're doing, but that's what the government chose to do.
Have we really been negligent in keeping up our end of NATO? We're supposed to spend 2% of GDP, and we're what, 1.3, 1.4?
We have definitely not taken that seriously. Let's just say not you and I, but the government of this country the governments have not taken that seriously the past couple of governments. And we're back to Canada doesn't want to spend money on anything. Like, I mean, the fundamental purpose of the government is to protect the population. Okay, that from there, everything else has to flow. But too many people have it the other way around and think that somebody else is going to do the protecting, and then they squawk about sovereignty. So you can't
have it both ways.
Well, a lot of Canadians think they can, and they think that that's somehow acceptable. But if you're standing outside this, it's not acceptable, and we look ridiculous and not serious.
I'm very angry over the fact that we put our young people in harm's way, and we don't equip them for life and death situations.
Well, that's interesting. That's a societal problem.
Big time.
We've got a whole society that thinks bad things happen somewhere else, and it's not going to affect them. And there's a lot of people that think that way.
Just, folks, a weird tidbit, something that took place in 2009 when it was posed that Russia themselves could become a member of NATO. Think about that for a second. In March 2009, the Russian envoy to NATO, Dmitry Rogozin, I hope I pronounced that correctly, while not ruling out NATO membership at some point in the future, stated, and I quote him, "Great powers don't join coalitions, they create coalitions." If there's any chance in the weird future that, who knows?
Wow.
Yeah. Whoever thought Germany and Japan would be allies, right? Back in 1940. So,
we're back to trying to predict things. It's just
you walk around in circles.
Yeah, I mean, we got to look at what we're dealing with now.
Yeah,
we're back to Canada's got to figure out what it wants.
What does Ukraine want, do you think?
Survive, flourish, not be Russian, be part of Europe, be part of NATO.
Yeah, they were certainly heading that way in 2014.
Now they're forced to rebuild.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've had this imposed on them, and that might be part of the objective. The other side doesn't have to sort of win the war. They just have to generate so much damage in Ukraine, it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years to repair it.
Yeah.
Everybody gets affected.
Well, there's an interesting quote not that long ago that Putin said in 2020, February, unabashedly claimed that the Ukrainians and Russians, get ready for this, are one and the same people. And he fully blamed foreign interference for the reason why Ukraine thinks it is actually its own country. Holy cow.
They were an independent country in 1919 before they were invaded by the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
Right. But then we're back to the whole Eastern European history.
Of course.
We don't teach it here, right? So
no, we don't.
The fact that the Soviet Union invaded Poland.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, you hear this crap by Canadians that Russia's always defensive, has never invaded anybody. Like, really?
Not true. Not true. Couldn't be further from the
truth. Twice, at least twice, not three times, right? I mean,
Czechoslovakia, 66, 67? Hungary, 54?
Hungary, 56.
56.
We could use their hybrid methodology against Czechoslovakia in 48, and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and Anne Applebaum, who's written like 4 or 5 books detailing this stuff. People need to go read her. Timothy Snyder, who's done exactly the same stuff for the so-called Bloodlands. Read Tim. My colleagues in these particular field, Peter Pomerantsev, who talks about, and Thomas Ridd, who deals with active measures. All this stuff's been written in the past 10 to 15 years. So people, it's out there. People want to go learn about it. It's not like it's a big secret. And these are good, credible historians. People have done substantial work, speak multiple languages, have accessed multiple archives. And their scholarship is beyond reproach. It's really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I never see them on Canadian TV. I never see them on Canadian media.
No.
I see very few of my colleagues using their work. And so, it's there. If people want to learn about it, there's plenty of. I teach it.
There you
I'm
go.
one guy, right?
Yeah.
So
I know, but important guy.
And then, of course, the work I've been doing on Soviet nuclear weapons and Stalin and Khrushchev and all that, that's relatively cutting edge stuff too, which takes another look at what people thought they knew for years. And now we're looking at it again and say, hey, wait a minute. Stalin was quite prepared to keep moving to the English Channel in 1944 or 45. So
Churchill was right.
Oh, yeah. So, anyway, there's all I can say is there's a vast body of scholarship out there that none of this should be a surprise or a secret, but people are still caught up in old think, unfortunately.
We've only got 2 or 3 questions left, but they're important ones. Sanctions, are they working? Waste of time? I mean, anybody filling their tanks today knows that they hope they are.
They're one means of pressurization. Like Saddam Hussein's Iraq didn't collapse because of sanctions, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, he went and built palaces with the money, right? I mean,
that's right.
But sanctions can generate friction on the other side, and that's what we want: social friction, financial friction, resource friction. But it has to be part of a larger strategy. It can't be a strategy unto itself. Again, I see people here go, let's just do sanctions. Well, it doesn't just work that way. It has to be military activity, diplomatic activity, economic activity.
And sanctions take time to kick in. They really do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a lovely day in Kingston, and I think it was 28 degrees or something. I was sitting outside at Starbucks again, where we spoke yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, my God, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful here. The bombs aren't going off. There's no war. Nobody's dying. The sky's blue. And I went in and I asked several of the baristas, what question would you like me to ask Professor Maloney? And I explained what was happening. They didn't really have a question. They weren't sure what was going on. And I get it. They're young kids, college age. Why should we as Canadians care?
Well, this country cannot be isolationist. It can't function on its own. Mm-hmm. There are a number of people in a certain province that would like it to be that way. That's not the way the real world works. We are connected. 95% of our trade is with the U.S. We have a relationship with them, whether people like it or not. And then, of course, geographically, on the other side of the pole, we've got the Russians. We also have our political, legal, and cultural traditions are integrated with that of Western and Eastern Europe, more so than any other part of the globe. So those ties go pretty deep, and we've actually expended lives and blood and treasure to defend that in the past. Okay, so then there's our value system, where we don't like others. We don't like people being pushed around, and even though we can't do anything about it, we join coalitions to do something about it. We do that for deterrence. We do that to intervene as required. So why? Well, it's what we are about on every level. Mm-hmm. We have been in the past. So all of a sudden we're going to stop doing it because why? Because somebody thinks we should just stop, or feels that we should stop. Because if you're a neutral, you just get crushed by all sides, or you're Switzerland, you're everybody's money under the mountains in Central Europe. And then you have no moral compass at all. You just float with the wind as required. And that's not what we're about, is it?
Nope. We shouldn't be. We never were. We shouldn't be now. I'm going to do 180 degree. Danny Elfman.
Yeah.
As you know, I compose music for film and TV. One of my favorite composers, Danny Elfman, Batman, folks, and
he's fantastic.
Fantastic. A litany of stuff. Incredible. There you go. Yeah, just by itself, right? On your website, you mentioned that you like his philosophy, his quote. Is it the quote, "It's okay to fail, to feel insecure"? Is that the one you were referring to?
Yes. Well, in a sense that having a zero defect life is not going to happen.
Mhm.
And the problem we're running into now with the current cultural revolution, if you don't fit their concept of perfection, you're destroyed.
That's right.
And that's
Canceled.
unacceptable in a free
Canceled.
society that values individuals. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And
Mob rule.
you look at Danny Elfman. He talks about failure and how, and not just failure, but getting screwed over.
Yeah.
And then him using that as rocket fuel to propel himself to move beyond it. And I think a lot of people should hoist that on board.
I agree with you completely. One last question for you. By the way, folks, our guest tonight has been Dr. Sean Maloney, professor of history at the Royal Military College, expert on the Cold War, the war in Afghanistan, and specializes on nuclear weapons and strategies, as you are now aware. Some of the books he's written: Emergency War Plan, The American Doomsday Machine, 1945-1960, all available at Amazon, by the way. I checked last night, so no problems getting them, folks. Learn, or if you want to go to Indigo here or Barnes & Noble in the States, I'm sure you'll find them there readily available. Learning to Love the Bomb, Canada's Nuclear Weapons During the Cold War, Enduring Freedom, a rogue historian in Afghanistan. And I would absolutely love to have you back on and just do a single show on Afghanistan, because you're the premier historian on Canada's service to the world in Afghanistan. Whenever you want to come, the door is open. Deconstructing Dr. Strangelove, The Secret History of Nuclear War Films. Securing Command of the Sea, NATO Naval Planning, 1948-1954. There's tons of stuff there, folks, and it's the real deal. Things that mainstream, not only mainstream media, I'd argue mainstream historians stay away from, because you are a rogue historian, in my view. You walk your own path, and I think that's to be admired. And it's part of the narrative when you're studying history. People say, Brent, why do you study history? What's the use of that? I have the same answer all the time. If something goes wrong in your life when you're young, traditionally you turn to your parents, because chances are they've gone through, if not the same thing, something very similar to that. So there's a template, a precedent that you can adopt into your own life. And for me, that's what history is. I want to thank you for coming on the show. Last question. This show is syndicated through all the community channels in Canada. It's also syndicated through all the college and university radio stations in Canada. It's also on television through the Cogeco network here in Ontario. So there's a lot of students, college-age students, listening, watching. What would you say to them?
Don't stop thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Be who you are, not what some ideology thinks you are. Ideologies suck the joy out of life. Don't get trapped.
That's perfect. I think it's a great way to end it. I want to thank you again. Folks, thanks for joining us tonight. And I know this has been informative for you, as it has been for me. You're getting stuff that mainstream doesn't cover. As always, I'm Brent Holland from the Brent Holland Show. Thanks for joining us tonight. See you next time.